All right, one of the most important things, one of the most vital things about any conference, about the entire author industry at this point, is the idea of networking, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode. For those of you just tuning in, make sure that you go and check out the rest of the episodes for Author Nation podcast. We're kind of trucking along here, but we've had some really interesting topics so far, looking at the industry from a wider point of view. Very interesting, but let's talk about networking because there is no word that I think gets misused more in our business than networking. When we say networking in context, what do we actually mean, Joe?
Wow. I think for me, it encompasses so much more than just the idea of like handing out my business card at a conference. For me, I believe it's probably the most potent thing in my success is how I interact with other people.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of natural at it. Like I've always been that way. And I just tend to, when I'm meeting somebody, I'm listening for how I can help them or how they might be able to be helped by somebody I know or how they could help somebody I know. Right. So I'm not trying to think what I can get out of them, but like, how does this fit with other stuff? And from my experience, I've been involved in some really successful ventures by connecting those things, right? So it's not just about like, what can I get out of the network, but how can I facilitate the network? Like, how can I help Johnny meet Kevin? And how can I make, some new author comfortable enough to step into this network? That's the other part of this thing is, hopefully we'll talk a little bit about it. The four of us as we're going here is like, this may also be a trigger word for some people in this industry is to think about going to a conference where there's 2,000 people and how overwhelming that is. And if we can help you just be a little bit better at that, the whole chance of you succeeding goes up exponentially. I also am really interested in us exploring the idea around networking, some research that I've looked at around how networking is the driver of innovation and creativity.
Right.
Right. It's not just about like, hey, what can you do for me? How can we transact? But it's by being in a place where you can see different influences, you can figure out what's next for yourself or the industry.
My approach to networking has been very much informed by my career as a writer because in terms of like looking at my network as being almost like my readership, like it's all about fine tuning that thing. And I take these disparate ideas that I come across in, when I'm researching a book, when I'm out there just hanging out. And that's how I write my books is I take idea A and idea B and put them together. To your point, that's exactly the way networking works for me. So I don't go into a relationship trying to determine like how can this person benefit me. Mm. More often I try to think in terms of how do I benefit this person and how does this person benefit someone else I know.
Yeah.
I try to keep all those things in mind. I actually think it's interesting because as you were talking, I realized like everyone around this table is really good at the networking thing.
It's because I don't think of it as networking, honestly. Yeah.
Well, let's dive into that. What's that mean?
I think that networking has a branding problem, right? I think that networking, to inception the whole thing, because I think that people have an idea of what networking means, and it is exactly that. It's schmoozing and handing out cards. I took every time I'm in an opportunity where I'm like, okay, well, I'm going into networking, and my spine straightens. Well, I'm going into networking right now, so I was like, well, I should get some business cards, and I don't know, like I keep falling for this. I keep thinking I'm going to get business cards, and then I do, and then I never, ever, ever hand them out. I've never handed out a business card.
I have like 30 years of business cards stacked in my
closet
in my office.
I took some last time. I was like, these aren't quite right, but they'll do in a pinch, and I just never reached into my pocket. I don't look at it as networking because networking has this feel of I'm going to make a connection. And it feels artificial. It feels like I'm going to go out there into the crowd, and it's very intimidating because what do I have to offer? And I look at it as meeting interesting people. That's exactly the way I approach it. And I mean, I didn't know Joe before like 2 months ago or whatever it was, and he was doing interesting things. And that's kind of how I approached a lot of this. Is I'd end up in a group with people, and somebody would say, "Well, I'm doing this." Oh, that's interesting. And then so I guess what I'm saying is, if you're somebody who's intimidated by the idea of networking, I would say 2 tips. The first is, instead of going in saying, "How can I network," with a capital N, whatever that means to you, instead, how do I go meet interesting people who are doing interesting work? And then the second tip is, don't be overly modest about yourself. Also, don't be a braggart. But if you can talk openly and enthusiastically about what you're doing to other people who are doing interesting things as well, that's the secret sauce of networking for me.
Plus, leave room for them to interject. Like you know, a lot of times I see
That was
people,
part of the interesting people
Yeah,
thing.
be interesting.
You're
be,
interesting,
be
but you don't
authentic.
get to talk.
Right. Yeah. And I have seen people in the past, and I've sometimes been this person who, you know, you dominate the conversation and you don't allow the other person to interject and comment on. Maybe you made an interesting point, and they want to just add to it. You know.
Thank you for that clarification,
Yeah.
because you're absolutely right. When I say don't be modest, overly modest, the opposite happens all the time. And you're not even trying to brag. You're just, well, I'm working on this series and I'm doing this. It's like, guess what? Nobody cares as much as you do. So temper it accordingly.
Yeah. No one wants to see your vacation slides.
Right.
Yeah.
I
So-
have pictures of my grandbaby. I'm going to show you right now. Well, I think there's 2 things that I've learned over the last few years about networking, and specifically about conversations with other people. And one is, I have learned that our neurospicy friends, our neurodivergent friends, sometimes it may seem like they're one-upping conversations and having, like, if you tell me about your book and then I immediately tell you about my book, it's not one-upmanship. It's a form of relations.
Yeah.
It's a form of how they're forming relations and how they're connecting with you. And I have learned that, and I've learned that about other people that I've worked with, is I've misinterpreted what they're saying instead of, and I've said, oh God, I don't want to, but now I have to step back and go, oh, that is a way for them to relate. That is the way that they are forming that connection. And so I'm a little more generous in hearing stories and listening more actively. And I've had to pay attention to that a little bit more in our industry in particular, because we are a lot of introverts. There's a lot of folks in our industry that are introverts and have hard times with connections. As specifically at conferences, I was very impressed very early with conferences. Particularly, I have to give props to Craig Martell for this. He had people there when people got overwhelmed or when people were confused. They were very clearly identified, and we're going to continue that practice at Author Nation, where there's a safe person for people that are overwhelmed to go to and say, what do I do? Where do I go? Who do I see? What do I think? And those intentionality points, I think, I was always very impressed by them, and I will remain impressed by them because we're going to do that with intentionality. We have a lot of folks that have challenges opening up and having conversations or talking about themselves. And as the woman in the room, as women, we are very often taught not to brag, not to say things, not to be quiet, to be, less than it in a lot of ways. So I think it is important that we address that in the conference, with the conference, and have people that can model ways that they can have conversations in a different way, listening, active listening. There's all kinds of ways that we can do that. We have a blog series, I think, that we're going to talk about that in a little more depth too, right?
Yeah.
To give people specific tricks, because networking, I think it does have a branding problem. I think you're absolutely correct.
You
But I
used
think
a-
there's unique scenarios within that, with different groups and different, groups of folks.
You
That have
used a
challenges.
term earlier. You said connection, and I actually think that's a key. And I also want to address like the idea of there are people who have a hard time with this, but I've always thought of myself as a connector. That's the way I operate.
Yeah.
That's how I network. I want to basically form a connection between this person and that person, and then with me being that bridge in between, everybody kind of has goodwill toward me. Is the way I operate. But I think it is kind of incumbent upon us, if we are good at this sort of thing, at connecting especially, that we realize that there are people out there, especially at these conferences, they would give anything to connect with persons A, B, or C, but they don't have, whatever, they're missing something, like they don't have the courage, or, they're intimidated. So if we can take that first step and then start being the person that connects them,
Yeah.
everybody ends up benefiting from that. What's your take, Joe?
So there's a guy named Ron Burt who's done a bunch of research on, his book is Brokerage and Closure, and it's all about networking. I actually had him as a professor, and name drop. His research shows that people that are the connectors are the ones that end up in, of course, most of the networks he's looking at are corporate networks. They're the ones that get the promotions. They're the ones that are paid higher. There's benefit in creating a network. And I tell that story to get the community to think about, if we could imagine that there's some overlay of the author community, author nation, right? Where we could start to see those connections, right? And how that all starts to form, and to be where we could make that more intentional, like to really think about what we're trying to do is build that superpowered network, because then we all benefit from it. Because even if, like, you and I have a weak tie, like we just know each other, I'm now tapped into that, and you may have a strong tie to somebody that at some point I could strengthen my tie with you, that you would then get me to that person that could make what you just said happen, that I could meet that person. I could reduce the degrees of separation, right? So I'm spending a lot of time thinking about how, when we're doing this work behind the scenes for the show, we're building the structure that makes this happen, right? Because if we create that entity, that's going to benefit all of us, right? Where we're going to be able to tap into it. Now, what Chelle was touching on, which is how do we help people in that phase where it's difficult? Like, either whatever reason they have some real stress around that. What I can say is this: start to embrace that difficulty. That's where the magic happens. It's not supposed to be easy, right?
Right.
When you go there, everyone in that room thinks everyone's looking at them. Ergo, nobody is looking at anybody else but themselves, right? How many times do you remember what you've been embarrassed by? Okay? How many times do you remember when somebody else has been embarrassed, or even know that they've been embarrassed? It's because of our point of view in this whole thing. So a lot of it is understanding, getting the community to get us all to understand, like, we're all in this uncomfortable place. So let's make the most of it, and it'll eventually get more comfortable, and we'll get what we're trying to achieve. So I know that was a little esoteric to the question, but like, that's the stuff that's going through my head about networking and why it's so important.
Yeah.
Well, let's come back to why it's important, right? Because I think one of the greatest benefits of conferences is the networking. I can probably not remember most of the sessions that I went to, but I remember the people that I had dinner with. I remember the people that I sat across the table with. I remember the people that I talked to in the hall and had those chit chats with. And those were hard to overcome, because I run ambivert, like I'm equal introvert and extrovert, right? And there's just some days where I shut down and I don't want to people, right? And I think there's a lot of people that are like that. I can talk, but I'm drained by it. And, but conferences and the connections that are formed at those conferences are immeasurable to my career. Completely. I can't even quantify how important those conversations have become. They spark ideas. They help me think about things in broader terms. They give me a touch point and a model for somebody. Like, the conversations are they're immeasurable. The other thing about networking at conferences is this industry is incredibly unique in that we do compete, right? Let's just say that. But we don't compete in the strictest sense, because we're not selling, there's not one widget to be sold. There's not one book that we're trying to get a customer to buy. What our product is a satisfied reader experience, and we have multiple vendors and multiple authors are able to do that. So if you go to conferences and you meet groups of people, you can create a collaboration to satisfy that one reader. You can figure out newsletter swaps, and there's technology to do that, but there's a a much better connection that's formed when you meet somebody and, you know, you're talking and you both write sweet romance or whatever, and you both figure out that you can, you know, swap newsletters, or you could, you know, go in on an anthology, or, you know, whatever it is. Those opportunities spring forth organically at conferences. It just happens. It's the magic. It's just insane how amazing those things are. And it's almost, you can't quantify that, right? You can't say, come to a conference because you'll get X. I say come to the conference because that's where the magic and the alchemy is, right? There's the magic that gets you there and the alchemy that happens when things happen in the room. So can we do better to help facilitate those conversations? Yes, but I think we need to come back to, don't discount the fact that it does happen. It just does.
You sometimes can't even know what the benefit of that is going to be until you're in the thick of it.
No.
Well, I would argue that it's the networking function that has created more value than anything else.
Yes.
Like literally put together writing relationships, publishing companies, created subgenres out of things that happen at conferences and people meeting and maybe not right then and there, but the relationship starts. And to further on from that point, you know, it's what's the attitude that you go into that conference with? Are you going to find the people that you can just kind of imitate, or a small group that's going to teach you some secrets and that you can just kind of leverage? Or are you going to look for opportunity? Because both will exist at a conference. Like I've seen more and more as this is happening, as it's getting tougher in the industry, as these small cells start to develop where, like, we have this circle of trust. I'm going to share what's working with me right now. I'm not going to share it with you because I don't necessarily trust you. Right. And then what we're doing is we're actually creating competition between the two of us, because we're now using the same tactics and strategies versus maybe I need to go talk to this guy because he's got some weird ass idea that I've got the other half to. Mm-hmm. And when we put it together, we've just created a multi-million-dollar opportunity for us and others. That's the way I would hope people would start to think about this.
There's also a benefit in just having leveraging the wisdom in the room, right? You hear other ideas and you can follow up with people immediately. Like on podcasts and things, you hear ideas, but you can't necessarily connect with that person in the immediacy and start to spark things. And there's another concept that I have heard after many, many conferences, and that is sometimes you go because it feels like a family reunion, right? It feels like you're going to see your friends, and you don't necessarily, like, we go to Vegas and we go to ping pong and we go to Vegas and we, you know, there's certain things that we do every time we go because it's like a family reunion, not taking the business out of it, but there's, you know, another level of it as well, because we are working somewhat solo in our careers a lot of the time. And so there's that spark that happens, and there's that well that gets refilled by going and hanging out with other creatives and your friends.
Yeah, you should not discount that aspect of the whole thing. And that is actually a vital part of networking, is just building a support network. It's not just about, you know, how do I create some, or how do I make these connections that are going to expand my business. It's also about, well, you know, one of our episodes earlier was, you know, your best writing life, you know, and you mentioned actually that you couldn't do it alone. You had to find your people. And that is part of what this is, you know, you make the connections, you find people go to a lot of these conferences because, you know, Apple shows up or Amazon or whatever. Those are good connections to try to make. But I would argue that you're going to get a lot more benefit of just connecting to all the other authors and finding those who share your struggle, share your, you know, personal dynamics, so that you can all lean on each other.
Good luck finding Apple anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, I had to know his face. Like, they hide. Do you guys want to hear my best networking tip?
I guess so, Johnny. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about this, and
It's not business cards.
No, it's not business cards. Well, I feel like I want to reiterate again, because I just know how intimidated people are by networking. I do not see it as a thing at all. For me, it's going and talking to people, and undifferentiated too. It's not like I'm looking for the people who have something to give. It's just like, well, this person is interesting. And so I know I already said that, but that's one, is to not give it so much weight. Another is I want to strike a balance between business and personal, Because I think that when people go in and they're like, okay, well, let me tell you about my business. I'm going to tell you, how can you have a business? It's so much more interesting when you just talk and you're just friendly. Man,
Like-
look at this thing that happened the other
Like
day.
volleyball. Like you and I sat across from each other at
Yes,
dinner one night. We
exactly.
connected about our kids playing volleyball.
And Bob Schneider.
And Bob Schneider. Like those were our two.
And that's the point of
Huge
connection.
things, right.
That's the point of connection.
It
It's
is.
not necessarily Chelle runs Indie Author Magazine, although that might come in handy.
Right.
You know, but then another is to know that you are planting seeds that you may not actually ever reap, or that might be years down the road. Like if I'm talking to you at a conference, I don't know that anything's going to come with that, and I shouldn't go into it with the expectation that it will.
Right.
Just talk to people. And then the last thing I would say is, I'm a little dorky about this. I always take lots of notes, so I will know when you meet somebody. The tendency, what happens? Oh, hi, I'm Johnny, I'm so and so, and then you immediately forget. Oh, what was their name again?
Yeah.
Like remembering people's names or details. So you bet I wrote down that you and I had volleyball and Bob Schneider in common. Now I don't need that reminder anymore, but that's one more thing where I'm like, people like to be appreciated and remembered. And that's not a tactic. It's not like I'm going to do that so that I can get something out of you.
Right.
It's more like it's just a human thing. And it reminds me of this thing. So we ran the Smarter Artist Conference, and there was this guy who I think he just did it 2 years, maybe 3. And I think his name was Ben Hale, if I'm remembering right.
Yes, Ben.
Ben.
Yeah.
And he learned the names of literally everybody at the conference.
did.
Hundreds of people.
and he stood up and recited.
Stood up
them.
and recited, you're
Yes.
so and so, you're so and so,
Yes.
you're
Not
so
just
and
the
so.
names, he remembered a detail about them.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So
What do I'm sorry, I hate to
Go ahead.
interrupt, but I just want to get the punchline in here. So what the secret? He said this on the last. Do you either you weren't there? Do either you remember the secret that Ben said to remembering all those
I
names?
don't.
He said the secret. He actually kind of teared up a little bit when he said this. He said the secret is remembering that every person matters.
Yeah.
And therefore, you're not just a face. You're a name with a life. You have, maybe a family or a partner or a house or hobbies. And remembering that is, to me, that's the heart of networking. To me, is not calling it networking. It's just humanity.
So, quick story about Ben. I was at a very small group gathering with him and about 25 other authors. And I felt like I was talking too much, right? Because I was answering a lot of questions, but they were a lot of technical questions, and I was the tech chick, right? So I had the answers. And so I was apologizing, and that was just my, oh, I'm sorry, I know the answer to this, like jumping in. And Ben came up to me at a break and said, I just want to let you know, you should not apologize. You are the smartest person in the room with regard to this. And, you have a lot of value. You've added so much to this conversation. And I really want you to know you shouldn't apologize because you have this key. Will you commit not to do that during the next session? And it wasn't like he was annoyed. He was just affirming and esteeming me. And that carried with me. And then I saw him at NINC, and I walked up to him and I said, that made me feel incredible. I remembered that for months and months and months after that. It helped me remember not to apologize for what I know and what I say. And Ben is on the cover next month of the magazine because
Excellent.
I really wanted people to hear
Yeah.
how he does that and what he does.
He's a good guy.
It's an amazing story, but that is probably the most succinct and articulate example of networking and why networking matters so much.
Well,
right?
he's
That he
definitely
is just
proven to be a master at it, and I think there's lessons you can kind of take from what he did, and you don't have to go memorize the name of everyone at a conference. If they tried to do that at Author Nation, it would be that scene from what's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or something, where he's doing the filibuster. It would be that scene. He'd just keel over dead at the end. But
I think you should do that. I think you should challenge accepted.
she's I just said he would keel over dead, and she wants me to be the one to do it. But the lesson really is that the approach that he took is the one everyone should take, which is you're talking to a human being.
Exactly.
And that human being has their own dreams, their own goals,
Right.
their own needs. And the key to successful networking is how do I come at everything. I try to come at everything from a position of humility and service. And, how am I serving this person on the other side? So in terms of, as we're getting close to needing to wrap up, but I want to talk specifically, like, what's the approach people should take when they come to Author Nation, the conference in November? Like, what's the approach people should come in with when it comes to networking?
I would say, for personal approach, if this is something that kind of makes your hair stand on end, like, understand that we're here to support you and help you get better at this, because this gets back to our core mission. We want you to have your best life through writing. The best way to do this is for you to build your network. If you don't have a network, we want to help you do that. We want to help you find your tribe of authors that are going to support you and, understand your uniqueness. We want to help you find the readers you can find. So we're going to do a lot of, the flip side of that is we're spending a lot of time focusing on how we can facilitate that, because it's going to benefit everyone. The better we are at this, I think this is, for me, probably one of the most important things that we can do structurally different about a conference, is really thinking about the networking piece, because it is the magic, right? And it's not that we're looking that it makes it sell us more tickets or it, gets better speakers. That'll be a follow-on effect. What it is that intrinsic value of the whole thing is like, I have to be here because my people are here. I can't miss out on a year, because if I do, I'm basically getting left out of the industry. I hope that answered it.
Yeah, that does make.
And to that end, we have built in we will have less sessions than we've traditionally had in the past, so that we intentionally build in space and time to synthesize and process and connect and talk about things between the sessions, right? Because we've had a lot of folks that have said, I'm so overwhelmed, I just go up to my room and I listen to the sessions. And that, to me, is missing the whole point of the conference, which to me also says we've been overscheduled traditionally, right? We haven't built in that time and that intentionality for people to be able to connect and think about things and talk about things and have those relational conversations about things. So we've talked about how can we build that in with more intentionality.
And you reminded me of a good point. We physically have changing the space. We're taking out one of the rooms to make more room for a common area, so that salon space gets bigger, which means we lost 12 sessions?
12 sessions,
Yeah.
right off the bat.
Right.
But we also have seating,
Yeah.
right? So we have conversation pits, and we have places where people can go and relax and gather, instead of sitting at straight back chairs and, fumbling through papers. There's more, and this was Sue's really that came in and said, we need to have space and places where people feel comfortable, and we kind of eliminate some of those barriers to connecting with people and having conversations.
Yeah, I know you're trying to wrap up, but if you remember, you weren't there, but the old Sam's Town, right? We all have these idyllic memories of the Mystic Falls Bar. It's not.
Memories, maybe nightmares. Just depends on what your point of
A
view was.
nightmare becomes a fond memory once you get through it successfully.
Right.
Yeah.
Fever dreams, yeah.
But what's the heart of that is that people were connecting there, right?
Right.
They weren't,
It was literally a central bar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all it was. It closed early.
Yep.
And every hour on the hour after 8 o'clock, there was a horrible laser light show with squawking animals.
Well, come back to Neek. Neek is the tiki bar. Like, everybody knows that's the space where people go. Like,
That's where you go, yeah.
Every conference has that baked in thing.
Now,
right?
you can
That
say
people
it's all about the free booze,
You could
but it's
say
really
that.
the networking.
It is the networking.
I didn't know there was free booze.
Oh, absolutely. Depending on who you're hanging
Yeah,
around
you
with.
gotta sit with people that have been there. a
Oh,
while.
well, that's not free booze. That's somebody buying your booze.
Right.
Which, yeah.
Yes. All washes out the same way, though. So, yes, I think so. The moral here is networking is important. I don't think anybody would have questioned that. But, and I did want to add, because the sessions, like, I'm traditionally not someone who really even goes to the sessions. It's not that I don't have anything to learn, but I feel like, my role is always to be out among people
I'm a
outside
little
of
like
those
that.
things. However, if you're sitting in on those sessions, that's your opportunity to connect with the people who also attended. Look around and take note of who's there. You now have something literally in common that you can go talk to them about. Hey, did you take any notes of this? Because I missed something he said. Or, what did you think of this point? It's an excuse. It's an opportunity. Networking is vital to this business, though, because even though writing is in and of itself a solitary activity. The business of writing is something we can't do on our own. So with that, I think we'd better wrap up. For those of you listening and watching, if you really want to network, show up in November for the actual Author Nation conference in Las Vegas. I promise you there will be people there, and you will have an opportunity to meet them. And also make sure you're tuning into the rest of this series of Author Nation podcasts. We're going to be talking about a whole raft of things coming up. So, and go find those back episodes. And we'll see you all next time.